All right, what's up everybody? So got a really good question that came in, and I feel like this would help a lot of people out because I think that a lot of people are thinking this, they just don't ask it. So the question was this: how do I know if I'm gripping the pistol right? Like, what are some things that I can do to assess that? So I think first thing that you need to figure out is what are the key principles that we're looking for when we're thinking about gripping the pistol. Principles are things that, you're going to look to and like constantly, assess your specific techniques that you're doing. Like, are these things fitting the principles that I'm doing? Are they, are they making what I'm trying to accomplish in those principles better? A good example of this, the principles that I look for with grip is the way that I grip the gun. Is it making the gun behave in a very predictable manner? Meaning, if I put the dot on a place on a target and I press the trigger, the dot lifts. I'll be really honest with you guys, I don't really care where it goes. What's way more interesting than that is, like, where does the dot come back down to? Is it returning to the exact same spot quickly and precisely, or is it returning to a different place every time? In my opinion, that would be bad. Am I able to grip the gun in such a way that I can bang on the trigger for as long as I want to or need to without the gun moving off of the target? These are two principles that I think are very, very important when we're thinking about how we go about gripping the gun. So when you guys go out, in your live fire practice, which, by the way, when you're thinking about, like, how do I know how to grip the gun? How do I go out and work this? Like, it does require live fire. So I would do things like marksmanship type of drills, shooting doubles, bill drills, stuff like that at different yardages. And while you're doing that, you're assessing, things like, number one, am I keeping consistent pressures on the gun, right? Or is my support hand coming off, as the gun is recoiling, and then I feel myself like gripping my firing hand and pressing the trigger with my entire hand? Am I keeping consistent pressures throughout the entire string of fire? Most people do not. This is why we see kind of, rounds all over the place on targets. This is why, like, if you shot, if you're shooting for groups or shooting bills at 10-15 yards, this is why, like, when you see low left as a righty, like, that is your firing hand pressing into the gun, putting inconsistent pressures on the gun throughout the entire string of fire. So this is a biggie to me. Like, am I keeping consistent pressures throughout the entire string of fire? I think the next one that we need to start looking for that, is gonna play to the principles that we just chatted about, or I just chatted about, is like, do I have the proper type of pressures on the gun? Meaning, am I gripping like really, really hard with my firing hand? Like, that would be a bad thing in my opinion. If I grip really hard with my firing hand, I lose the dexterity in my trigger finger. And what also happens is when this firing hand tenses up, the other fingers move, and you have a whole lot more sympathetic movement in your hands while you're pressing the trigger. So if this firing hand is tensing up and these other fingers are moving, you're putting input into the gun that is unwanted. So, like, can I relax this firing hand and free up this trigger finger, be able to move it fast with minimal to no movement in my firing hand fingers, no sympathetic movement? Is my support hand like clamped onto the gun with consistent pressure throughout the entire string of fire? Again, while I'm shooting doubles or a bill. This is a biggie. Like, you see this a lot. Like, people will draw the gun, they'll fire 1-2 rounds, their support hand completely leaves the exercise, so to speak, and the firing hand starts taking over. So, like, am I keeping consistent pressures, the consistent proper pressures on the pistol throughout the string of fire? Now, I think, this is kind of exploratory mode, so to speak, like, doing marksmanship type of drills, trying to assess, all of these things. What does the gun feel like in my hands? Am I keeping consistent pressures? What does it look like it's doing? In other words, like, when I'm aware of the sights, kind of in the background, like, look to a place, like, where's the sight returning to? All things that we need to be trying to assess when we're looking at grip. Once that is kind of figured out, so to speak, like, you get an idea of, okay, like, these are the types of pressures that I need to be able to not only run fast splits, but like very controlled type of shooting. These are the type of pressures that I need. This is what it feels like when I have consistent pressures across the board. And then you start to onboard that in your own training. This makes you aware of what it's actually supposed to feel like. From there, you're gonna do things like bring it into your dry fire, because now that you know what it's supposed to feel like, you know, then you can do things like assess it in your dry fire. Draw to a sight picture. What does my grip feel like? You know, do some transitions while you're working on, you know, the visual piece and the mechanical piece of transitions. Like you're assessing, you know, is my grip staying the same? Is it staying consistent throughout the entire string? Or, you know, on target number 2, did I let off? Like figuring out how to grip the gun and how to do it properly is going to require, you know, not only work, sorry, this is going to require work for you guys, but it's going to require you to have an honest assessment of what it's supposed to feel like throughout whatever you're doing in your training. This is also something that I don't believe you can add layers to. Like you're not gonna go like, oh, let me just try to make, you know, grip harder by adding a reload, or like, you know, let me come into a position. Like there's no such thing as like adding layers, in my opinion, on top of trying to assess what your grip is supposed to feel like and do and accomplish while you're shooting. This is just a matter of like, once you onboard it into your training, once you know, get an idea of what it's supposed to feel like in your training, this assessment of your grip never stops, right? This is something that you guys should be constantly assessing and constantly trying to make better, in terms of like, is the, you know, the techniques that I'm using in my grip accomplishing these key principles that we talked about in the very beginning of the video. So hopefully this helps you guys out. If you guys have any questions on this, as always, drop them in the comment box below. Always happy to answer them for you.